Assalamu alaikum, viewers. We have Brother Saeed Ghalampour from Houston. He's joined us tonight online, so he'll be, inshallah, reading the Dua Kumail. Assalamu alaikum, Brother Saeed. I will
عليكم السلام
proceed
ورحمة
to start the Dua Kumail. Muhammad wa ali Muhammad salawat.
الله.
Allahumma
اللهم
salli
صل على
ala Muhammad
محمد
wa ala Muhammad.
محمد وعجل فرجه. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم إني أسألك برحمتك التي وسعت كل شيء وبقوتك التي قهرت بها كل شيء وخضع لها كل شيء وظل لها كل شيء وبجبروتك التي غلبت بها كل شيء وبعزتك التي لا يقوم لها شيء وبعظمتك التي ملأت كل شيء وبسلطانك الذي أعلى كل شيء وبوجهك الباقي بعد فناء كل شيء وبأسمائك التي ملأت أركان كل شيء وبعلمك الذي أحاط بكل شيء وبنور وجهك الذي أضاء له كل شيء يا نور يا قدوس يا نور يا قدوس يا نور يا قدوس يا أول الأولين ويا آخر الآخرين اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تحت كل عسام اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تنزل النقام اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تغير النعام اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تحبس الدعاء اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تنزل البلاء اللهم اغفر لي كل ذنب أذنبته وكل خطيئة أخطأتها اللهم إني أتقرب إليك بذكرك وأستشفع بك إلى نفسك وأسألك بجودك أن تدنيني من قربك وأن توزعني شكرك وأن تلهمني ذكرك اللهم إني أسألك سؤال خاضع متذلل خاشع أن تسامحني وترحمني وتجعلني بقسمك راضيا قانعا وفي جميع الأحوال متواضعا اللهم أسألك سؤال من اشتدت فاقته وأنزل بك عند الشدائد حاجته وعظم فيما عندك رغبته اللهم عظم سلطانك وعلى مكانك وخفي مكرك وظهر أمرك وغلب قهرك وجرت قدرتك ولا يمكن الفرار من حكومتك اللهم لا أجد لذنوبي غافرا ولا لقبائه ساترا ولا لشيء من عملي القبيح بالحسن مبدلا غيرك لا إله إلا أنت سبحانك وبحمدك ظلمت نفسي ظلمت نفسي ظلمت نفسي وتجرأت بجهلي وسكنت إلى قديم ذكرك لي ومنك علي اللهم مولاي كم من قبيح سترت وكم من فاده من البلاء أقلت وكم من عثار وغيت وكم من مكروه دفعت وكم من ثناء جميل لست أهلا له نشرت اللهم عظم بلائي وأفرط بي سوء حالي وقصرت بي أعمالي وقعدت بي أغلالي وحبسني عن نفعي بعد أملي وخدعتني الدنيا بغرورها ونفسي بجنايتها ومطالي يا سيدي، فأسألك بعزتك أن لا يحجب عنك دعائي سوء عملي وفعالي، ولا تفزحني بخفي ما اطلعت عليه من سري، ولا تعاجلني بالعقوبة على ما عملته في خلواتي من سوء فعلي وإساءتي ودوام تفريطي وجهالتي وكثرة شهواتي وغفلتي. وكن اللهم بعزتك لي في كل الأحوال رؤوفا، وعلي في جميع الأمور عطوفا. إلهي وربي من لي غيرك، أسأله كشف ضري والنذر في أمري. إلهي ومولاي، أجريت علي حكما اتبعت فيه هوى نفسي، ولم أهترس فيه من تزيين عدوي، فغرني بما أهوى وأسعده على ذلك القضاء، فتجاوزت بما جرى علي من ذلك بعد حدودك، وخالفت بعض أوامرك، فلك الحمد علي في جميع ذلك، ولا حجة لي فيما جرى علي فيه قضاؤك، وألزمني حكمك وبلاؤك، وقد أتيتك يا إلهي بعد تقصيري وإسرافي على نفسي، معتذرا نادما منكسرا مستغيلا مستغفرا منيبا مغرا مذعنا معترفا، لا أجد مفرا مما كان مني، ولا مفزعا أتوجه إليه في أمري غير قبولك عذري وإدخالك إياي في سعة رحمتك. اللهم فاقبل عذري وارحم شدة ضري، وفكني من شد وثاقي. يا رب ارحم ضعف بدني، يا رب ارحم ضعف بدني، يا رب ارحم ضعف بدني ورقة جلدي ودقة عظمي. يا من بدأ خلقي وذكري وتربيتي وبري وتقضيتي، أبني لابتداء كرمك وسالف برك بي يا إلهي وسيدي وربي. أتراك معذبي بنارك بعد توحيدك، وبعد من طوى عليه قلبي من معرفتك، ولهج به لساني من ذكرك، واعتقده ضميري من حبك، وبعد صدق اعترافي ودعائي خاضعا لربوبيتك. هيهات أنت أكرم من أن تضيع من ربيت، أو تبعد من أدنيت، أو تشرد من آويت، أو تسلم إلى البلاء من كفيته ورحمت. وليت شعري يا سيدي وإلهي ومولاي، أتسلط النار على وجوه خرت لعظمتك ساجدة، وعلى ألسن نطقت بتوحيدك صادقة، وبشكرك مادحا، وعلى قلوب اعترفت بإلهيتك محققة، وعلى ضمائر هوت من العلم بك حتى صارت خاشعة، وعلى جوارح سعت إلى أوطان تعبدك طاععة، وأشارت باستغفارك مذعنة. ما هكذا الظن بك ولا أخبرنا بفضلك عنك. يا كريم يا رب، يا كريم يا رب، يا كريم يا رب. وأنت تعلم زعفي عن قليل من بلاء الدنيا وعقوباتها وما يجري فيها من المكاره على أهلها، على أن ذلك بلاء ومكروه، قليل مكثوه، يسير بغاء، قصير مدته. فكيف احتمالي لبلاء الآخرة وجليل وقوع المكاره فيها، وهو بلاء تطول مدته ويدوم مقامه ولا يخفف عن أهله، لأنه لا يكون إلا عن غضبك وانتقامك وسخطك، وهذا ما لا تقوم له السماوات والأرض يا سيدي، فكيف لي وأنا عبدك الضعيف الذليل الحقير المسكين المستكين. يا إلهي وربي وسيدي ومولاي، لأي الأمور إليك أشكو ولما من أضج وأبكي، لأليم العذاب وشدته أم لطول البلاء ومدته؟ فلئن صيرتني للعقوبات مع أعدائك وجمعت بيني وبين أهل بلائك وفرقت بيني وبين أحبائك وأوليائك، فهبني يا إلهي وسيدي ومولاي وربي، صبرت على عذابك فكيف أصبر على فراقك، وهبني صبرت على حر نارك فكيف أصبر عن النذر إلى كرامتك، كيف أسكن في النار ورجائي أفوك، فبعزتك يا سيدي ومولاي أقسم صادقا لئن تركتني ناطقا لأضجن إليك بين أهلها ضجيج الآملين، ولا صرخن إليك صراخ المستصرخين، ولا أبكين عليك بكاء الفاقدين، ولا أنادينك أين كنت يا ولي المؤمنين، يا غاية آمال العارفين، يا غياث المستغيثين، يا غياث المستغيثين، يا غياث المستغيثين، يا حبيب قلوب الصادقين، ويا إله العالمين، أفترى أنك سبحانك يا إلهي وبحمدك تسمع فيها صوت عبد مسلم سجن فيها بمخالفته وذاق طعم عذابها بمعصيته وهبس بين أطباقها بجرمه وجريرته، وهو يذج إليك ذجيج مؤمل لرحمتك ويناديك بلسان أهل توحيدك ويتوسل إليك بربوبيتك يا مولاي، فكيف يبغى في العذاب وهو يرجو ما صلف من حلمك؟ أم كيف تؤلمه النار وهو يعمل فضلك ورحمتك؟ أم كيف يحرقه لهيبها وأنت تسمع صوته وترى مكانه؟ أم كيف يشتمل عليه زفيرها وأنت تعلم زعفه؟ أم كيف يتغلغل بين أطباقها وأنت تعلم صدقه؟ أم كيف تزجره زبانيتها وهو يناديك يا ربه؟ أم كيف يرجو فضلك في إتقه منها فتتركه فيها؟ هيهات ما ذلك الظن بك ولا المعروف من فضلك ولا مشبه لما عملت به الموحدين من برك وإحسانك، فباليقين أقطع لولا ما حكمت به من تعظيم جاهديك وغضيت به من إخلاد معانديك لجعلت النار كلها بردا وسلاما وما كان لأحد فيها مغرا ولا مقاما، لكنك إن تقدست أسماؤك أقسمت أن تملأها من الكافرين من الجنة والناس أجمعين، وأن تخلد فيها المعاندين، وأنت جل ثناؤك قلت مقتدئا وتطولت بالعنعام متكرما، أفمن كان مؤمنا كمن كان فاسقا لا يستوون. إلهي وسيدي فأسألك بالقدرة التي قدرتها وبالقضية التي هتمتها وهكمتها وغلبت من عليه أجريتها، أن تهب لي في هذه الليلة وفي هذه الساعة كل جرم أجرمت وكل ذنب أذنبت وكل قبيح أسررت وكل جهل عملت، كتمته أو أعلنت، أخفيته أو أظهرت، وكل سيئة أمرت بإثباتها الكرام الكاتبين الذين وكلتهم بحفظ ما يكون مني وجعلتهم شهودا علي مع جباره، وكنت أنت الرقيب علي من ورائهم والشاهد لما خفي عنه، وبرحمتك أخفيته وبفضلك سترته، وأن توفر حظي من كل خير أنزلته أو إحسان فضلته أو بر نشرته أو رزق بسطته أو ذنب تغفره أو خطأ تستره. يا رب 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 يا إلهي وسيدي ومولاي ومالك رقي، يا من بيده ناصيتي، يا عليما بضري ومسكنتي، يا خبيرا بفقري وفاقتي، يا رب 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 يا رب. أسألك بحقك وقدسك وعظم صفاتك وأسمائك أن تجعل أوقاتي من الليل والنهار بذكرك معمورة وبخدمتك موصولة وأعمالي عندك مقبولة، حتى تكون أعمالي وأورادي كلها وردا واحدا وحالي في خدمتك سرمدا. يا سيدي يا من عليه معملي، يا من إليه شكوت أحوالي، يا رب 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 يا رب. قد على خدمتك جواره واشدد على العظيمة جوانه، وهب لي الجد في خشيتك والدوام في الاتصال بخدمتك، حتى أسرح إليك في ميادين السابقين وأسرع إليك في البارزين، وأشتاق إلى غربك في المشتاقين، وأدنو منك دنو المخلصين، وأخافك مخافة المعقنين، واجتمع في جوارك مع المؤمنين. اللهم ومن أرادني بسوء فأرد، ومن كادني فكد، واجعلني من أحسن عبيدك نصيبا عندك، وأقربهم منزلة منك، وأخصهم زلفة لديك، فإنه لا ينال ذلك إلا بفضلك وجدلي بجودك، وعتف علي بمجدك، واحفظني برحمتك، واجعل لساني بذكرك لهجا، وقلبي بحبك متيما، ومن علي بحسن إجابتك، وأقلني عثرتي واغفر زلتي، فإنك قضيت على عبادك بعبادتك، وأمرتهم بدعائك، وضمنت لهم الإجابة. فإليك يا ربي نسبت وجهي، وإليك يا رب مددت يدي، فبعزتك استجب لي دعائي وبلغني مناي، ولا تقطع من فضلك رجائي، ولا تقطع من فضلك رجائي، واكفني شر الجن والإنس من أعدائي، يا صريع الرضا، يا صريع الرضا، يا صريع الرضا، اغفر لمن لا يملك إلا الدعاء، فإنك فعال لما تشاء، يا من اسمه دواء وذكره شفاء وطاعته غنى، ارحم من رأس ماله الرجاء وسلاهه البكاء، يا سابق النعم، يا دافع النغام، يا نور المستوحشين في الظلام، يا عالما لا يعلم، صل على محمد وآل محمد وافعل بي ما أنت أهله، وصلى الله على رسوله والأئمة الميامين من آله وسلم تسليما كثيرا كثيرا. رحم الله من يقرأ الفاتحة مع الصلوات. التماس دعاء همگی إن شاء الله.
اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد. جزاك الله. May Allah accept your recitation. For our viewers, we have Sheikh Amin just joining now.
Assalamu alaikum.
عليكم السلام
وعليكم السلام شيخ.
سيد هذا شو أخوه؟
التماس دعاء جواد اسكوس اسم.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وآله الطاهرين. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم. الخطبة 27، وهو لباس التقوى ودرع الله الحسينة وجنته الوثيقة، فمن تركه رغبة عنه ألبسه الله ثوب الذل وشمله البلاء والديث بالصغار والقماءة. Continuing with khutbah number 27, we talked about how this khutbah, the Imam, he speaks in a general way about fighting in the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But there's a story behind this khutbah, and the story, as was mentioned in our last session, had to do with Muawiyah and the gharat, those attacks, those little attacks, those hit and runs that took place after the Battle of Nahrawan, before the Shahada of Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam, and how those were very, bad and sad times for Imam Ali alayhi salam, because he knows what's going on, right? He sees what's going on. He wants to stop it, but he just doesn't have the ones who have that resolve to help him fight Muawiyah. And so, unfortunately, what happens is, these attacks take place during that time period. Muawiyah keeps sending little armies and sometimes even bigger armies here and there to attack and retreat very quickly, just to cause instability in the Muslim lands that are under the rule of Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam. So when Imam Ali hears about the city of Anbar being attacked and things that have happened in there, and how his governor there and representative there, Hassan bin Hassan al-Bakri, is killed by the forces of Muawiyah, it says that he got very upset, and he went to a place called Nukhayla and delivered this sermon. And so in it, he talks about the importance of fighting when the time is right for fighting, and what happens if you don't fight. And then he talks about other things that I gave an overview last session about. So we're now in the actual text of the khutbah. Last week was a lot of introductory points, actually. All right, so he's speaking about fighting in the way of Allah. He says, وَهُوَ لِبَاسُ التَّقْوَى وَالدِّرْعُ اللَّهِ الْحَصِينَةِ. That this fighting in the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, three things here he says. لِبَاسُ التَّقْوَى دِرْعُ اللَّهِ الْحَصِينَةِ جُنَّتُهُ الْوَثِيقَةِ. Three things he mentions that are explanatory of and descriptive of this fighting in the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when you have to. The first one is libasul taqwa. He likens and compares taqwa and obedience of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He likens it to a libas, clothing. We'll talk about each of these. Dir'ullah al-hasina, dir'ullah al-hasina. God's armor that protects, وَجُنَّتُهُ الْوَثِيقَةِ, his shield that can be relied on, right? Is strong and can be relied on. All right. So these are the descriptions of fighting in the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Let's break each of these down. Libasul taqwa. This is not the first time that you will see this term, right? The first time you will see it is in the Quran. وَلِبَاسُ التَّقْوَى ذَلِكَ خَيْرٌ. That's the verse that mentions the same comparison. Yeah. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. يا بني آدم قد أنزلنا عليكم لباسا يواري سوآتكم وريشا وَلِبَاسُ التَّقْوَى ذَلِكَ خَيْرٌ. Surah A'raf, verse 26. All right, so what do we have in this verse? This verse is talking about the blessing of Allah, the fact that us human beings have this option of wearing clothing, right? In the story of Prophet Adam, whether you take it as a real story or metaphorical, whichever you take, the point is being made back then that when they commit that deed that they were not supposed to, what happens as a result is that فَبَدَى لَهُمَا سَوْآتُهُمَا, that their private parts become exposed, and so they're looking for a way to hide it. Now this story, it has also come in other scriptures other than the Quran as well. Anyway, the Quran speaks about the clothing, how it's a blessing. Why? Because it covers you up. You don't feel ashamed. You're covered up when you wear clothing, right? These are things that can be taken for granted sometimes. Excuse me. All right. But look, and the verse is speaking about this blessing, that this is something that you use to cover yourselves, and it's also a means of adornment. It's a zina. It's warishan. Now in Farsi, rish means your beard, but in Arabic it has a different meaning. After the Quran speaks of this clothing and how much of a blessing it is that can be taken for granted, وَلِبَاسُ التَّقْوَى ذَلِكَ خَيْرٌ. It ends with this, that the libas and covering of taqwa though is better. Why? Let's talk about that. Allama Tabatabai, he says that why is the libas of taqwa, the clothing of taqwa, better and superior to normal clothing? Well, what's for sure is we don't have a shirt or a pants, or I don't know, whatever, a robe that is called taqwa. This is of course metaphorical, and Allama Tabatabai makes this point that he says, look, when you look at normal clothing, what does it do? It protects you from the heat, from the cold, from embarrassment, all these things, right? Well, taqwa is something that also protects you, like clothing. It protects you from things even worse than that. Now, when you're cold here or you're hot here in this world, in this life, all right, what's the worst that can happen? Yeah, unless really it's really chilly and cold and you lose your life. But usually it's really cold, you catch a cold, or the heat gets to you, you get a bad headache and stuff like that. Or if someone sees part of your body, it's really embarrassing, for example, right? But that's about it really. But libasul taqwa, what does it protect you from? Unlike the clothing here that it protects you from the hot and the cold and embarrassment there on the day of judgment and the hereafter, you are going to be protected from the adhab of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Yeah, this is much greater. This is and much more enduring of a problem. Adhab of akhirah and punishment of God is a much more bigger problem than, okay, a little bit of embarrassment here or getting too hot or cold here, right? Libasul taqwa, it's called libas because of the protection it offers, but what it protects from is much more significant. As a result, this quote unquote clothing is better, khayrun, is much better than the libas that Allah has blessed us with in this life, in this dunya. Okay? So now, anything really, libasul taqwa, the clothing of taqwa, meaning what? Meaning when you exercise taqwa, when you exercise obedience of God in different situations and scenarios. So the question is, the Imam refers to this fighting in the way of Allah as also libasul taqwa. What's going on here? Does that disprove other forms of obedience of God? Does it disprove them as taqwa or libasul taqwa? No. Yeah, any form of obedience of God contributes to libasul taqwa, right? And so one of the forms of taqwa and obedience of God is when it is time to really fight, when it is time to defend, that one steps up and does that. It's a manifestation of obedience of God and acknowledging that His lordship over me. Yeah. And so this is all. Since it's an instance of taqwa, this fighting in the way of Allah, then we can refer to it as libasul taqwa. Just like you can refer to salat, for example, as libasul taqwa. Yeah. It is also a form of and a manifestation of obedience of God, and a manifestation of taqwa. So you can refer to it as also libasul taqwa. Anyway, but some forms of obedience, some forms of worship might not be referred to as libasul taqwa because they're not as significant as other ones. Fighting in the way of God, putting your life on the line when you have to, that is something that really stands out. And that's why the ajr and reward of a shaheed outweighs all the other rewards out there, overtakes all of them really almost. All right. So libasul taqwa, Amir al-Mu'mineen, before he gets into scolding these people, scolding these Kufans for betraying and not helping out and things reaching this point, he's speaking in general about the merits and the greatness of fighting in the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that's number one. It is libasul taqwa. Number two, junnatuhu al-wathiq, dir'ullah al-hasina wa junnatuhu al-wathiqa. Two more that are very similar. Armor that protects or repels everything from you, and the shield that you can rely on, right? All right. What's going on here? There's a point that I want to, inshallah, explain here. And that is that this khutbah was issued and delivered by the Imam. Why? He wants to encourage and push the people to go and fight against Muawiyah, right? So it's an offensive. It's not a defensive thing that we're talking about here. It's an offensive battle that he wants to wage. So the question is this: if it's an offensive, not a defensive one, then why does he refer to it as armor or a shield? Those are things that you usually use for defense, not offense, right? Wouldn't it have been better if Amir al-Mu'mineen had referred to it as like Sayfullah, for example, Sayfullah al-Muqatti'a, the cutting sword of God, for example, or al-Qati'a, and then like I don't know, warumhuhu, I don't know whatever description you want to or adjective you want to bring for it. Rumh means spear, so like it's God's piercing spear and God's cutting blade and sword. Why? Because it's offensive, right? It's used for offense, in other words. It's not for defense, right? So what we're trying to figure out here is why does the Imam use a description that portrays this fighting in the way of Allah as defensive, while what he was wishing for the people to do and commanding them to do was to take the offensive. I think a little bit of thought, gives us an answer to this, and that is that the Imam, what he has in mind when he's telling the people this, is that true, you're taking the offensive when you're fighting in the way of Allah sometimes, right? But two things we can say here. Number one is that your offense is really translates to defense. Why? Because you know that they are coming. They're going to want to come eventually, and they're going to do what they need to do. And so you're going to strike them outside. And we'll get to this later. Amir al-Mu'minin speaks about this more later. We'll talk about it. But number 2 point right now that I want to make is this, that when we look at the bigger picture when it comes to fighting in the way of Allah, putting your life on the line for Allah when it's necessary, what you get is that if done properly, if done right, it serves as a protection of the religion and a protection of the people who are adherents to the religion. Yes, the Muslims and Islam, both. If this doesn't take place, whether offensive or defensive, in the end, even when it's for offense, even when it's done in the offensive method, still, even there, it is for the preservation and protection of Islam. Yeah, so it's protecting. That's the function and role it plays. And once again, we'll get to some other points later, hopefully today in today's session, in regards to this point as well. But those 2 points are right now, just so you have them in a nutshell. All right, so if this is how important fighting in the way of Allah is, and I mentioned this last session, I have to say it again as well. Once again, no matter how good something is, doesn't mean you can force it to happen either. What do I mean? If we're in times that there is no right now fighting in the way of Allah, someone's, I don't know, sitting at home here, I don't know, someplace in America, for example, right? There is nothing going on where they have to like physically go out and fight or defend, right? Unless someone attacks their home or something, that's a different story, right? So there are some people that go to an extreme thinking, wow, this is such a wonderful thing. It is babun min abwabil jannah. So let me try to open this gate to Jannah here where I am. No. That's not what it is talking about. If it becomes wajib, then that's a different story. And the cases for that are, are mentioned elsewhere. And it's not like this is going to be a door that's always open wherever you are. And this is a mistake some people make sometimes. It's kind of like saying, let me give you an example, brothers and sisters. It's kind of like saying that, what is it called? I'tikaf is very mustahab, right? As you all know, i'tikaf means to, devote 3 days and dedicate 3 days, at least, in a masjid. And you have to fast in those 3 days, and you're not allowed to leave the masjid for those 3 days. And mostly what you're doing is worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in those 3 days. Only you can only leave in very, very exceptional circumstances and situations. All right, and you have to fast in those 3 days. Okay, so but the thing is that one of the conditions most, if not all, maraji' have is that this has to take place in the Masjid Jami' of the city. Masjid Jami', one of those main masjids that people go to, not just any masjid or any center, right? For it to be an official i'tikaf, right? So people are listening to this, the merits, the rewards, and the greatness of participating in i'tikaf, right? And so they're like, you know what? We can't do i'tikaf, so let's do something similar to it here, and let's just do it, hold it in our center. Okay, well, that's fine, but it's not i'tikaf. Just remember that. You can't force i'tikaf when the circumstances aren't there, right? You're going to try to do something similar to it, that's fine. Okay, you might get some rewards as a result of, the worship that you do in 3 days, if you're fasting for 3 days. So there are different rewards for the different worships that you're doing and performing. But you don't have that package of i'tikaf. You can't force it. you have to be in the Masjid Jami', at least according to the fatwa of some of our maraji. All right, so this is just an example. Okay, I don't want to sound like, there's a perfect example, but I'm trying to get a point across here. Yeah, and I think the point is pretty clear. What the point I'm trying to make is same thing with fighting in the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? Fighting in the way of Allah, yeah, that's a situation that comes up very exceptional during the Prophet's time, during the time of Amir al-Mu'mineen, for example, things like that. All right, so it says, فَمَنْ تَرَكَهُ رَغْبَةً. If it's this important, right? If this fighting in the way of Allah is this important, فَمَنْ تَرَكَهُ رَغْبَةً عَنْهُ أَلْبَسَهُ اللَّهُ ثَوْبَ الذُّلِّ. That if somebody, now that we know that it's this important, and it is a protection, it's a shield, without it you are vulnerable, you can get in big trouble. If this is the case, if anyone abandons it because they're not interested in it, in other words, they have no reason to abandon it, but they just do because they don't like it, right? And of course you won't like it. You're putting your life on the line. Who likes doing that, And there's some points I want to make about this as well towards the end. The Quran speaks about this, that just because you don't like certain things doesn't mean they're not good for you. Something that in the societies that we're in today, is the opposite of it is preached. Do what you like, do only that which you take pleasure in, and things like that. Anyway, we'll talk about that later, inshallah, as well. So it says, whoever abandons this responsibility because they don't like it, then Allah will clothe them with the clothing of lowliness and dhillah, zillat. So here it said, they abandon it because they don't like it, they're not interested. Raghbatan anhu. This is an important clause here. Why? What does it rule out? It rules out those cases where people may have an excuse. Yeah, we have in the Quran even, the Quran relates to us cases where people would come to the Prophet. They want to go and fight alongside the Prophet, but they just couldn't. Right? Sometimes it was just because of financial reasons. They didn't have a weapon, for example. The guy was too poor to own a weapon, right? Back then was not like today. Today, you just go to Walmart, right? Everything's accessible. But back then, it wasn't like that. Things were very, very limited. Not everyone could maybe afford a sword even, right? So anyway, there were some who came to the Prophet. They didn't have, a mule or a camel or a horse to take them to the far off lands to fight alongside the Prophet. And so the Quran describes that their eyes would fill with tears when they couldn't find that which they could carry them as a vessel to fight alongside the Prophet. Right? So these people are an exception. The Quran makes an exception for them. That okay, these people, they're not turning away, they're not abandoning fighting alongside the Prophet, right? Because they're not interested. No, they're very interested actually, because they know this is a door of Jannah that's opening now for them. But they have an excuse and it's justified that they're not going to go. All right, so number one, so there's a few things that the Imam lists here that happen to those who turn away without any excuse, really, turn away from this responsibility. So number one was Allah will, make them dhalil, make them lowly. Number two, shamilahu al-bala, hardship and tragedy will encompass them. Number three, duyitha bis-saghari wal-qama'ah, they'll be covered with the dress of disgrace and distress. Right? These are very similar words that and synonymous words that the Imam is using here. All right, so from all of this, finally, وَضُرِبَ عَلَى قَلْبِهِ بِالْإِسْحَابِ. Ishab ibn Abil Hadid, he says that here it means that for someone's intellect to kind of be affected and go. So 4 things the Imam lists here. 3 of them I feel are just a result of the cause and effect that govern this life that we live in and this world that we live in. When you don't fight when you're supposed to fight, what's going to happen? Well, lowliness will come. tragedy and hardship will come because those people who don't care about you now are going to be ruling over you. Yeah, this is a dua to recite. Allahumma la tusallit alayna man la yarhamuna. Don't put over us that a person who isn't going to have mercy on us. If the people want someone who is going to have a little more mercy on them versus others who don't have mercy, then they have to step up. Now, in this day and age, people vote. Other times it was other things. Anyway, number two, tragedy and hardship will befall them. Why? Because they didn't do anything about it. Number three, once again, lowliness and distress will, befall them. These are all, I would say, cause and effect. I mean, even if there was no God, God forbid, of course, even if there was no God, right? These things will happen when you don't stand up when you're supposed to. But the fourth one on the list, which was their intellect will go, their let's say maybe judgment, fair judgment that they might have, that power to judge things properly, understand things properly, will also cease to exist. This seems like it is something that comes from God. So the first three were cause and effect. The fourth one, it just seems like it's something that Allah just, as a punishment will do to people. Those who don't do and don't stand up when they're supposed to. And we've had this throughout the history of after the Prophet's life, I would say. Companions who didn't help Amirul Mu'mineen alayhi salam. We see what happens to some of them, the decisions they make later, some of their children, how they turn out, and so on. So all in all, either the cause and effect of dunya will get you, or that more metaphysical cause and effect and causality that governs this life will get to you, which comes from Allah, which here was referred to as ishab. ضُرِبَ عَلَى قَلْبِهِ بِالْإِسْحَابِ. Allah will cover their heart with, just dumbness, it seems. Yeah. Another one of those cause and effects of this world that will befall this person. وَأُدِيلَ الْحَقُّ مِنْهُ بِتَضْيِيعِ الْجِهَادِ. Because he put aside this responsibility, yeah, then their haqq, their right, that which belongs to them, yeah, is going to slip through their fingers, and they're not going to be able to get what rightfully is theirs. We have this saying in Farsi, haqq gereftanist, not dadani. They don't give you your rights. You have to take your rights. That's just how it is. And so as a result, this person will be deprived of that which is rightfully theirs because they didn't stand up for it, right? So to have hope and confidence always in the system might not work. Yeah, it might take more than that. Once again, each case is different, each scenario is different. Can't fall on either extremes of total negligence, and on the other hand of being too zealous and too active, even when all the scholars are saying like, hey, we think that now's not the time for this much noise that you're making, for example. Each case is different. We'll have to see. So anyway, we're talking in general, not right now. I want to give an example of this, that the haqq is something that you get. So Muawiyah teaches us that, unfortunately. He showed us that. How? It's interesting. It's very interesting. This has always been on my mind. This is one of those things that can just knock me out, all right? What is it? The fact that, how did you do it, Muawiyah? How did you pull it off, man? Like, you are like last tier Sahabi. You're a nobody, all right? When it comes to that list of Sahaba, you're like way at the bottom. You embrace Islam way at the end, okay? You were really a nobody. You're one of the tulaqa, according to, I would say, most historians. I can't say all of them, because some will say that no, he embraced Islam before the conquest of Mecca. But anyway, I would say maybe majority, at least 50% say no, he embraced it, after the conquest of Mecca, alongside his father Abu Sufyan. So he was one of the tulaqa, one of the freed ones by the Prophet. Anyway, that's the tier of suhbah that you have. and yet you are able to somehow get away with not giving bay'ah to Amir al-Mu'mineen. All right, what are we talking about here? We're talking about you're supposed to get the haqq, that which is rightfully yours. Lots of times this is how it's going to be. Amir al-Mu'mineen, everyone will say bay'ah belonged to him, right? Right, it was rightfully his as the fourth Khalifa for now, let's say, okay? As fourth Khalifa, you owe everyone that's a Muslim owes him bay'ah. Muawiyah didn't give him bay'ah. What did Amir al-Mu'mineen do? He said, okay, let me sit here and wait for bay'ah to come my way. Nope. He got up and he went after Muawiyah. All right? The Battle of Siffin and the likes of those, when you look at them, it's not that Amir al-Mu'mineen is waiting for them to come. He's going after them too. You're supposed to give bay'ah. Here it's justified for it to be offensive, right? Although there are details here I'm not going to get into, whether or not we'll call it offensive or defensive or whatever. I won't get into those details right now. There are some details, there are some discussions that we can have on that. But anyway, at first glance, yeah, those who are at least not from the Shi'i school of thought, they will say that it was offensive for sure. It wasn't offensive. And so why? Well, he knows that this is a haqq that has to be taken because it ain't going to be given on a silver platter to nobody. All right? It's not going to be given to anybody. So now look at this. This is an interesting part which really knocks me out, man. I'm trying to figure this out. All right. Ali ibn Abi Talib is going after a haqq that is rightfully his, eventually doesn't get it, becomes shaheed. Muawiyah doesn't die when they're trying to assassinate him. He lives longer for another 20 years, 21 years maybe. And so what happens is Khilafah goes from Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam to Imam al-Hasan alayhi salam. But then Imam al-Hasan, because of certain reasons, is forced to relinquish this. And Muawiyah becomes Khalifatul Muslimin. And everyone accepts it. And everyone thanks Imam al-Hasan. All right, what am I trying to say here? What I'm trying to say is Muawiyah teaches us that if something's your right, and not only is it your right, even if it's not your right, and everyone knows it's not your right, you can still get it if you stand up. That's how important it is. Amir al-Mu'mineen is trying to knock sense into these people, telling them, look, if you don't go after it, it's not going to come to you. If a person puts aside the fighting completely when it's necessary, then you're going to lose that which is rightfully yours. And those who the right doesn't belong to, they'll take it, one. Two, others will thank you for giving it to them. Yeah, right, till today, yeah, not the Shi'i school of thought, but when you look into the Sunni sources, you will find this, that Imam al-Hasan alayhi salam is hailed as the one who brought peace back to the Muslimin. How? By relinquishing Khilafah to Muawiyah. And then they have a hadith, yeah, that is mentioned also. It's very famous, that the Holy Prophet was on the minbar, sallallahu alayhi wa alih, and he says, when he sees Imam al-Hasan amongst the crowd, or maybe playing, as a little child, he says, Inna ibni hada sayyid, Inna ibni hada sayyid, that this son of mine is a sayyid, it's a very noble person, and that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will bring peace amongst two of the great groups of the Muslimin through him. So everyone hails Imam al-Hasan for, as the one who brought peace back. So look at this. Muawiyah got that which was not rightfully his, one. And two, to add insult to injury, everyone's thanking Imam Hasan for quote unquote doing the right thing. Oh my God, are you serious? This is like one of the saddest parts of history. But it happened. It happened, and it's because of what Amir al-Mu'mineen is saying here. وَأُدِيلَ الْحَقُّ مِنْهِ بِتَضْيِيعِ الْجِهَادِ, that the haqq, that which is rightfully yours, is going to be gone because you neglected this responsibility. And let's add to this line of Amir al-Mu'mineen, not only are you deprived of of that which is rightfully yours, but also that will go to those who don't are not entitled to that right, and they will take it as theirs now. Yeah. لا يدرك الحق إلا بالجد. Another in khutbah 29 we'll get to inshallah in a few sessions. Amir al-Mu'mineen, he says, look, truth or that which is rightfully yours is not going to be reached except through proper endeavor and making sacrifices. All right, so that was number 5 on the list. Now number 6 on the list for those who turn their back on this responsibility when there's no excuse. Wasim al khasaf, they will be dragged towards destruction. Yeah, when those who don't share your ideology, when those who are your enemy take over because you just slacked off, because you were not interested, because you were not willing to make the sacrifice that was necessary in that given scenario, what happens is they will rule over you and slowly drag you to destruction. Now, destruction can mean death sometimes, and sometimes it can be something worse than death. وَالْفِتْنَةُ أَشَدُّ مِنَ الْقَتْلِ. Yes, a fitna, something that we are facing in this day and age of, I'm going to use the example of the West, that a lot of our Muslim youth, yeah, they are adopting certain things, certain values of the society that we're in that will go against Islamic teachings, right? That is also devastation, yeah, and destruction. So now here, of course, the way to counter, I'll get to, is with knowledge and with academics and teaching and things like that, spreading the message of Islam more and more, especially to our youth, and sometimes even changing the models that we have and we've been having for 20, 30 years to get that greater message across to them. Right? So in any case, that responsibility, if it is neglected, simal khasaf, that this person will be dragged towards destruction, and destruction can have different meanings. وَمُنِعَ النَّصَفِ, and this person will be deprived of any form of justice towards them. You can't complain later that, oh, look, they're not being fair to us, this and that. Well, you didn't do your part. You didn't step up when you were supposed to. Now you can't complain. And now these things that are going wrong, the only person to blame is yourself. If Imam Hussein alayhi salam is killed on Ashura, I would put the blame on 50 years of negligence of the Muslim Ummah. From Saqifa all the way till Yazid becoming successor to the throne. Yes, that's what I'll call it, the throne. And Muawiyah taking bay'ah from the Muslims for him when before Muawiyah died. All right, so let's go back. Remember, if you remember, I said there's 2 or 3 points that I want to make, and not one of them is this. Number 1 is that when we talk about why would someone want to turn away from it? Well, it's clear because it's bitter. No one likes putting their life on the line. The Quran speaks about this. It says, Surah Baqarah, verse 216, كُتِبَ عَلَيْكُمُ الْقِتَالُ وَهُوَ كُرْهٌ لَكُمْ. During the Prophet's time, qital, fighting, became incumbent upon the Muslims in different cases. كُتِبَ عَلَيْكُمُ الْقِتَالُ وَهُوَ كُرْهٌ لَكُمْ. And it is something that you don't like. Kurh, when we say something is makruh, that means it's disliked. You don't like it, you're turned off by it. وَعَسَى أَن تَكْرَهُ شَيْئًا وَهُوَ خَيْرٌ لَكُمْ. But this verse goes on to say, but look, God knows how many things are out there that you don't like, but are to your benefit, are good for you. عَسَى أَن تَكْرَهُ شَيْئًا وَهُوَ خَيْرٌ لَكُمْ. وَعَسَى أن تحب, it's like the verse is laying it all out, breaking it all down for us. وَعَسَى أَن تُحِبُّوا شَيْئًا وَهُوَ شَرٌ لَكُمْ. And sometimes you like something while it is shar for you, it is not good for you. I mean, it sounds like, what we tell our kids when we are taking them to the doctor or something, or when we are, giving them medicine, they don't like the taste of it, although nowadays the medicine tastes better than candy, for God's sake, But there was a time where medicine was very, very bitter. So that's what parents would say, like, just hang in there, suck it up, bottle up the bitterness, the pain, whatever, and you'll be good in no time. That's what the verse is sounding like, really. Look, There are some things you don't like, but just, you know, you should know that there, you know, just because you don't like it doesn't mean it's not good for you, and vice versa. Wallahu ya'lamu wa antum la ta'lamun. Allah knows and you don't know. All right. So let's talk about this verse a little bit. These people who turn away, the problem is the perspective. This perspective is so important, and we all know about it, of course. We've heard it all our lives. This Quranic perspective of giving akhirah precedence and preference over dunya. Understanding that no matter what it takes, as long as I can secure my Jannah, right? That's all that matters to me. Brothers and sisters, this argument will come in a lot of places, not just here, right? We have this whole thing about, oh, this gender and that gender in Islam. Why are there differences? Okay, I don't want to get into that discussion. But nowadays, if you tell someone that, you know, based on the Quran or based on the hadiths, that their Jannah lies in certain duties and responsibilities that they carry out for the family, for example. If you tell them that, they get offended sometimes. Oh, are you saying I'm inferior? I'm not good enough to do this or to do that? Brothers and sisters, if we understood what Jannah was, and we know the price for Jannah is this, we wouldn't care about whatever else the price for everyone else is. The problem for us is that we don't have an akhirah-centered outlook to things and perspective of things. This is super important, right? If I tell somebody, well, not me, but the Quran or Hadith, unless you don't want to go by the Quran or Hadith, that's a different story. But if someone asks, okay, this person who, I don't know, let's say suffers from, I don't know, not having one leg or not having any legs and has to pray sitting, right? If you tell that person, hey, your Jannah lies in praying sitting, they shouldn't say, oh, but I want to be able to stand like the rest and pray. I want to be able to pray like the rest. Okay, that is something that you would like to do, understood. But the responsibility to get to Jannah is this. Don't worry about it. No one said you're anything less than anyone else, because what matters is, can you buy Jannah or not? If you can, forget about whatever else others are doing and how they're doing it. When it comes to the genders, the same thing. We have the same idea that, okay, the men have one thing to do, the women have other things to do. Some say no, they should be, they should have the same responsibilities. Not necessarily. As long as I can attain Jannah like this based on Quran and Hadith, then okay, this is what I'll do. And that for the other side, same thing. When it comes to qital, same thing. Okay, I don't like it. It's bitter. It's, who likes to do this? Who likes to put their life on the line? What am I going to do? What's my family going to do? That's true. But this is your Jannah right now. That's your Jannah. It really depends on how akhirah centered we are. This is like a very important point to think about. Once a person becomes akhirah centered and looks at things akhirah, with the akhirah being number one on its list, then this verse will flip for them. Yeah, the verse was speaking to all the little children out there. Children, even if they're 60 years old, sometimes they might still be children because they have a worldview of a child. That, look, you might not like it, but look, it might be good for you still. Don't think anything that you don't like necessarily is not good for you. It's not the case. If a person fixes the worldview, has the proper worldview, this verse will not apply to them anymore. It'll flip. Because for them now, whatever is in line with Allah's satisfaction that we get from the Quran and Hadith, and that is what secures for them Jannah, that's all that matters. Oh, I have to put my life on the line right now? This happens once every lifetime? Well, I guess that's what it is for me right now. Oh, we're living in peace right now. I have to live a long life of just not committing haram. Okay, that's my Jannah, that's my Jannah. I have to do this, I have to stay home, I have to do that, I have to take care of the family, I have to go out and bring bread to the table, all of this, okay, So this will be bitter for a person sometimes. But since Jannah lies in it, that's what's good for me, I'll go for it. I don't care. Yeah. This is how Imam Ali was, alayhi salam. Yeah. Even the scolding of others, people, if they would make fun of him, things like that wouldn't get to him either. Yeah. If he had to do something, he would make sure to do it. And that's why he had a lot of enemies. in this path of the satisfaction of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay, so this concludes the first part of this khutbah. We still haven't gotten to the part where the Imam speaks about the city of Anbar. He'll get to that later. For now, he's going through the different reasons why he's pushing these people for fighting in the way of Allah, fighting Muawiyah. There was a list of 6 or 7 things that he brought, that if a person turns their head on this, turns their back on this responsibility, will befall this individual. Some of them, I think personally, or 1 or 2 of them maybe, are divine punishments from God. The rest are just the effect. They are just the effect that the worldly effect of neglecting such a responsibility when it indeed has become your responsibility. Inshallah, we'll continue with the next part of this khutbah in our next session. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. And my salams to everyone who's tuned in. Sister Zainab, Brother Khurshid, Brother Wasi, Sister Anam, Brother Arshad, and Sister Rabab. I think it went brother, sister, yeah. Sister, brother, sister, brother. Okay. MashaAllah. Thank you very much. Keep us in your du'as. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.